full name is Mufti Ibrahim Qureshi. I'm a Muslim. I like the fact that Islam is a very personal religion. You have a very individual relationship with your creator. That's something that I like a lot, the whole individual aspect of it. A lot of people think it's like a foreign religion, something that's very different. We like to view ourselves as a continuation of Judaism and Christianity. We believe in the same God, same prophets. A lot of the teachings and stories that are in the Quran are also in the Bible, in the Old and New Testament. So we like to see ourselves as a continuation of the same Abrahamic faith. Extremism, oppression of women's rights, those are the things people kind of think of when they think of Islam. I mean, I hope not, but generally that's what we get, that when people do bring up Islam, that's usually the elephant in the room in their minds. The way Islam is portrayed today, sometimes it's a political exploitation, and just generally, I think hate is a very lucrative business. There's a whole industry of hate. You can hate any religion, any group of people. When you do that, you can make a lot of money. So whatever misjudgment people have, I think, stem from those things, and I think that's where you can find the answers to a lot of the misjudgment that people have. There are many different types of stereotypes, misjudgment people have about Islam and women's rights, Islam, and in terms of personal freedoms, but those are just a few of them. You know, people think that Islam is a violent religion. Again, that's a very general statement. Religion is neither peaceful nor violent. People make it violent or people make it peaceful. A very typical, easy example, like a knife. You know, a knife is something that you can use for very productive, good things, creative things. You can also use it for very bad things. So religion is the same way. It's the same thing. And this is something our country has a history with. Every decade, we've always demonized some group of people. The Russians, the Koreans, the Vietnamese. So there's always been a boogeyman. And right now it's our turn. We live in a time and age where even if they did, because of social media and other outlets, other platforms, it's become much more difficult. I do think people exploited Hollywood, movies and TV industry, just like they used to make movies about the Russians and communism and things of that sort. They did that with Islam as well. I think there are some news organizations that purposely do put Islam in a negative light, but then there are also others that are more balanced in the way they portray Islam. One thing I remember about news, a big part of news is also sensationalism. If you don't present something in a way that attracts people's attention, you become irrelevant and people won't watch your news cycle. So there's, by the nature of it, yes, I think people did exploit Islamophobia, but I think now it's less so than it was before. Just generally in the public, not so much. I mean, I lived in the UK for a few years. Over there is a lot of racism there, but it's more in terms of race, less so about religion. Religion gets mixed up now because of after 9/11. Over here, generally, I haven't experienced religious discrimination. Racism, yes, but not so much religious. Well, I think what happened is people became a little bit more curious. Prior to 9/11, the only time people knew about Islam is maybe whatever's happening in the Middle East. Very few people took any notice of that. Maybe depictions in movies and TV shows. But after 9/11, it was something that people kind of hit home with. People are like, now it's here and it's visible. It encouraged people to look into it more. And I think it's kind of helped more than it has harmed us. After 9/11, the sale for the copies of Quran is skyrocketed. People were buying Qurans left, right, and center, which is good for us. In the beginning, it used to bother me a lot. People will say things, they'll have these opinions, but once you've been exposed to it for a long time, you realize there's no point of internalizing people's ignorance. People will be judgmental if they want to, and if they don't want to, they won't. That's on them. It's not on us. If people do have these misconceptions, that's their problem. It's not my problem. Unless I do something to provoke it or I do something to harm them or make that stereotype go that way, then that's a different story. That's on me. But without knowing anybody, without knowing people, to have a generalization, that's a logical fallacy in itself. Why should I bother with it? It stems from ignorance. Stereotypes oftentimes are born from ignorance. If you want to eliminate ignorance, it's education. Obviously online you're going to find all sorts of things, but don't read biased information. Read things and look for the truth. If you're looking for the truth, you'll find it. And if you're not looking for it, you're just looking for your own version, or your own opinions, or to back up your own stereotypes, then you'll find that as well. So to objectively look for the truth and to educate yourself about who we are, what we do, what our faith is about, and get to know somebody. That's a very big aspect of it. A few years ago, there's a man who shot into a mosque. mask. And later on, he came back on the news and he apologized publicly. He said that, it would have only taken 5 minutes of your time. If I had 5 minutes of your time, I never would have done what I did. And I think that's key, the interpersonal relationships that often people run away from. Again, it's fear. Fear is one thing that pushes people away. And that's also an element of any racism, prejudice, stereotypes that exist. Fear is always a huge component of that. And in order to get rid of that, get to know somebody. I think that's probably the best way to go, to educate yourself and to get to know a Muslim if you have ill feelings or ill thoughts against them. It depends on the person and what they're saying and how they're saying it. There's no one general response. If someone's doing it in an accusatory way, I don't think it's my responsibility, or I don't feel I should have to be on the defensive. Just because someone has a stereotype or just because someone accuses me doesn't make it my fault. So I'm not going to take the blame for that, for something that I did not do. I was born and raised here in this country. I grew up here. For me, although my parents come from the Indian subcontinent, I respect the culture as part of my identity, but I'm not Pakistani, or I'm not Indian. I'm an American through and through. So I'm not going to apologize for what someone else did. If I did something wrong, I will apologize for that, but not for someone else's mistake, someone else's hatred. That's on them. I'm not going to entertain those types of, accusations. A lot. Before 9/11, I used to love travel, but after that, every airport I went to. In the beginning, it was pretty bad because they would just see a person with a beard and that would be it. Okay, we need to do some extra checking or whatever it is. Randomly selecting people for either pat downs or checking luggage. That increased. That did become annoying. While it was annoying, at the same time, I understand it. Safety is important. People are traveling. If I was on the plane, if there was someone like that, the thing you have to realize, terrorists, especially people who claim to be Islamic terrorists, they target Muslims more than they target anybody else. They're the biggest victims, more than anybody else. If you go to Iraq, you go to Syria, who are they killing? They're killing Muslims. We are also targets. I understand the safety aspect of it. I'm okay with that to a certain degree, but not when it leads to discrimination. That's where the problem comes in. When you have staff on the TSA that are not properly trained or may have prejudice and you still hire them, those types of things are not okay. I'll give you one example. I have a lot of experiences, but I'll give you one particular one. I was traveling with my family, my wife and my 2 sons. At that time, my youngest son was 6 months old. The oldest one is Yusuf Qureshi, and the youngest is Yunus Qureshi. We took a group, and we usually go to Mecca every year for a small little pilgrimage. They okayed me, they okayed my wife, they okayed my oldest son, but they wouldn't let my youngest son board the plane. So we're like, why? He's been blacklisted. Look, it says Y Qureshi, your son is Y Qureshi. So apparently there's someone else that they were investigating, also from our community. His name is Y Qureshi also. The initial of his first name and his last name were the same as my 2 kids. So they got mixed up, and I think that's where the confusion started happening. The rest of our group went easily, and my family was stuck there for 2 hours. And they checked our baggage, and they didn't find anything. They checked it again. They didn't find anything. They just made us wait for no reason. That was not fair. I'm like, he's 6 months old. You can see that with your own eyes. They're like, I'm sorry, we can't let you travel. That was not acceptable. Eventually, they called their supervisor, and then they realized, okay, it's someone else. It's not this 6-month-old baby. These types of experiences, they do wear on people. It does add to the resentment. A 6-month-old baby being flagged on no-fly zone. That's not right. That's not okay. So those type of experiences are there. Like I said, as long as there's a balance, I'm okay with it. I don't mind if they want to check me or they want to check someone else, but as long as it's not done in malice. And recently, I think it has kind of changed. Before it wasn't. It was straight up discriminatory before. Now there is a little bit of change. I don't see myself getting checked randomly. Sometimes they'll check me, sometimes they won't. A lot of the Middle East, a lot of it is politics. If you look at the history of ISIS, who are ISIS? These are all former Saddam soldiers, generals. After Saddam, these people are military people their entire life. What are they going to do? They're not just going to hide inside of a hole. If they try to attract people's attention to, hey, let's try to get these invaders out, no one's really going to listen to them. They played on people's fears, their vulnerabilities, and religion is one of those things. They know that if we make it a religious cause, we're more likely to get people. And these people have mastered, exploiting youth and youngsters in that way. A lot of these groups, it's mainly political. Think of it, if someone came and invaded our country, what would we do? We wouldn't just sit to the side, we would fight back. And that's what you see in a lot of these countries. These groups and these organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they put religion in there to get people to back up their cause, but they're not necessarily religious people, and they don't represent Islam. Well, you obviously haven't met my wife, then you would know. For me, as a man, it's probably not appropriate for me to answer that question. My advice would be go talk to another Muslim woman. Some families, some cultures, they may have that expectation, but living here in the United States, any woman who wears a hijab, she's doing it by choice. No woman who puts on a hijab is ever forced to do so. And any woman who's not wearing it, she's also not wearing it by choice as well. In my own family, some of my relatives wear hijab, some don't. In the same family, one of my cousins will be wearing it, the other will not be wearing hijab. It's a choice. What people think is restrictive it's more of a spiritual expression. And when you speak to a Muslim woman, that's what you'll get. Like I said, it's probably best to speak to a Muslim woman who does wear hijab and ask them that question. What does a hijab mean to you? Because hijab is, for them, it's a sign of modesty, but it's also a sign of no nonsense from the world. You're forcing the world to deal with you as an individual, as a person, without the distractions. And for some women, they may not feel comfortable, and they don't have to. Islam doesn't force them to do that. There's a verse in our Quran that says, "La ikraha fi din." There's no forcing in religion. You can't force spirituality on a person. So you can't force someone to be a good Muslim. There's no such thing as faith is something that has to do with the heart, and you can't fake that. That's something that's sincere, that's inside of a person. Things have changed. I won't say discrimination against Muslims has increased. I think people who have always been bigoted and hateful, they're going to be like that unless they themselves experience it. But I think the general perception, it changed from suspicion to kind of understanding. The last few years in LA, you won't experience as much racism as you will outside. There are many different minorities who live together, and we all experience it from time to time. So I think Islamic discrimination based on faith has kind of changed. People kind of grow out of it. Many people who are sincere-hearted, they've educated themselves, and they somewhat understand that that type of behavior is not okay. Well, Malcolm X is always number one. As an American, him, Muhammad Ali, these people were idols of ours. So people that we've always looked up to. They were just not afraid to say what was on their mind. They weren't afraid to establish the narrative at the time, the general public narrative. They weren't afraid to challenge anything. And those are things that people admire. No matter how much bad things or evil things get normalized, you don't accept it. Oftentimes what happened is they just kind of accepted the status quo. And it's important not to do that. In the 60s, 50s, and 60s, people generally, they rose up, they didn't accept it. The civil rights movement is something that, as Muslims, we are so indebted to them. What they did, they paved the way, and they showed the world, really, what non-violent struggles really look like. The way the civil rights leaders, they conduct themselves, what they did, how they organized themselves, how they showed their strength by boycotting and various other methods. It's just amazing to see how much power people can really have, that they really changed the narrative, the course of history, really, from there. Now, yes, racism, discrimination is still there, but it's not at the same level. It's not widely accepted as it was in those days. For me, and really any Muslim, the leaders of the civil rights movement those are people that we really look up to. I think the best way is to engage as many people as possible. The more you stay away, the more you kind of shelter yourself or hide away, it's just going to come after you. These types of problems, you can't run away from them, and you have to deal with them head on. The more people know you, the less likely they will have these types of negative stereotypes, and the less likely they'll judge you the wrong way. But the more you hide away, the more you shy away from these types of things. I mean, people who have a bully mentality, they usually go after the weakest link anyways. Be more involved in your MSAs, the Muslim Student Associations, be more involved in your mosque, be more involved in interfaith activities. This way, you gain more experience and confidence. You know how to present yourself, how to present your faith, and you also learn how to deal with people who may be discriminatory. To be a Muslim, for me, it's a very deep thing, because being a Muslim is not just a spiritual, religious experience. As Muslims, we're not allowed to hide away from society. We have to live within society. Being a good Muslim means also being a good father, a good husband, a good teacher, a good student, a good citizen. It means a lot of things. It just means to be a better person in all aspects of one's life, not just in terms of faith. I think the problem with a lot of people who practice faith is they practice faith to kind of hide a lot of their own insecurities, the demons that may be in their closet. And rather than dealing with those issues, they run away from them and they kind of mask it with religion. You get people who are very religious but also very judgmental. Because it's easy to pray. I can come to the mosque and pray, but then if I have a habit of lying, or if I have a bad character, maybe I treat people badly, that's a very difficult thing. To look in the mirror and to acknowledge that you have a problem and to do something about it's a very difficult thing. So what people often do is to kind of mask it with just religiosity. That's obviously not the way to go. And not just being a Muslim, being a practitioner of any faith, whether you're Christian, Jewish, or Buddhist, or whatever it may be, you can't practice religion or any spirituality to kind of mask what's inside. You have to deal with the issues, and you have to make that positive change. And that positive change in all aspects of your life, I think that's what it means to be a Muslim. was younger, like elementary school, it was a little bit difficult just because people were not very familiar with Islam at that time. Some people may vaguely have heard some stuff, maybe some movies, whatever, depicting us in a negative way. But growing up as first generation in school, you're growing up with American culture, but then when you go home, then we have the Indian subcontinent culture. So we have like dual cultures that we have to deal with. And on top of that, a different faith. Usually at that age, it's difficult generally being a minority, especially one of a different ethnicity and different religion, just to kind of juggle everything. Not so much because of discrimination from outside, but more just kind of self-discovery. You're just trying to find yourself, your way, your identity. Especially at that age, you're still discovering a lot of things about yourself. That's where I did feel a little bit uneasiness, a little difficulty, but as I grew older, I got more confidence in just identifying as a Muslim.